Welcome back to this series of musings on art and aesthetics. I'm calling this section the language of art. I'll be discussing some of the different forms that art takes and how artists use the formal elements to create works of art. Among other things, I'll be discussing composition and putting special emphasis on color. Once again, I want to begin with a little music. I want to play you a Duke Ellington piece called Take the A Train. That's Duke there sitting at the piano with his orchestra. I thought we could take a look at two artists' work while we listen to the music, Romare Bearden and Stuart Davis. Bearden did collages of jazz musicians using cut-up pieces of paper, and Davis did paintings that were influenced by jazz. He worked in a sort of pre-pop, very colorful, abstract style. All three of these artists were at their peak during the middle part of the 20th century. Let's listen to the music.
If you should take a train, you get to where you're going in a hurry. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Now it's coming. Can't you hear the rails go humming? If you should miss the A train, it's the quickest way to get to Harlem. Our modern culture has become somewhat desensitized to the fine arts, painting and sculpture. There's just a lot of background visual noise out there. Modern technology and mass media, they're constantly bombarding us with images. It's only natural for us to be excited by the amazing special effects in movies. Virtual reality is becoming more and more intense. All of these things, like this clip from Avatar, can grab our attention and titillate our senses. Obviously, there's a lot of artistic, creative efforts
needed to produce these amazing visual effects. Now, we can't expect a visit to a museum to have the same impact. Art does not reveal its secrets readily. Now, most people recognize this image, the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. Some people will go to the Louvre and make a beeline for her. They know this is a masterpiece, one of the most famous paintings in the world. Maybe some of you have seen her. Here's an old photograph of some people looking at her. You can't really get close, and she doesn't jump out at you. She doesn't blow the top of your head off like Emily Dickinson said about her art. It's smaller than you thought it would be. This is more like what you can expect when you visit her. A one-on-one interaction with the painting isn't really possible. It can be very disappointing, and you wonder what the hubbub is all about. Why is she so famous? A full, rich appreciation of art is an acquired taste. We have to learn to look and think for ourselves in an intelligent way. What's this? Well, everybody recognizes this Nike logo. Maybe more people than are familiar with the Mona Lisa. It's very compelling. It's an artistic design that suggests certain qualities, things like energy, speed, power, prestige. What's a real Nike? Well, here she is. This is the Nike of Samothrace, or the Winged Victory. She's a goddess that is also in the Louvre. I hope some of these people who are standing around here also made it around to see her. She comes from the late Hellenistic period of Greek art. Now, as you begin to learn things about the visual arts, let me suggest that there are 3 different things you should consider. First, the form. Well, this is the physical makeup of the art. What's it made out of? How are the materials used? How big is it? What color is it? Etc. What we call the formal elements. And then iconography, that's the subject matter. Its meaning, the symbolism. What does it represent? And then the third thing is the historical context. Who made it, where, and when. Now with these, the image below, Hiroshiga, Travelers in the Snow, comes from the Edo period in Japan. The iconography, well, it's winter, and people are moving through that landscape. The form is a woodblock print, meaning that it's ink colored on paper, and the formal elements put a lot of emphasis on line and shape. The Liechtenstein brushstroke is a steel sculpture. The formal elements, well, his lines and shapes define the way the sculpture looks, and the iconography is a brushstroke. It's supposed to look like something loose and expressive. And the historical context would be pop art. Liechtenstein worked in the latter part of the 20th century. Let's try a couple other examples. These are the famous terracotta warriors from ancient China. Life-size terracotta clay soldiers. Thousands of them were buried near the pyramid grave of the first emperor of China, Qin, in the 3rd century BCE. Their purpose was to protect him in the afterlife, and they're all extremely realistic. Here's an officer, smartly uniformed, has these wide roll-up sleeves. And as you can see on the left there, these were all originally painted in rather vivid colors to make them seem even more lifelike. Here's a detail of the officer. He furrows up his brow, seeming to express maybe the responsibilities of his rank. Now, we can't name any artists, since all of the people who made these were working anonymously for the glorification of Emperor Qin. But this man seems like a distinctive individual, as do all of these figures. Let me show you a few more faces of these men. Each one seems quite unique and naturalistically real, almost like portraits of individuals. The artisans who made these really wanted them to seem as lifelike and real as possible. Here, another amazing artwork. This is a depiction of Alexander the Great's victory over the Persians in the Battle of Issus. This is apparently a Roman copy of a Greek painting, although this is not a painting. It's a floor mosaic from a house in Pompeii. It's 16 feet wide, and it depicts the turning point in the battle. Alexander, on the left, on horseback, is spearing one of Darius's men. And Darius, we see him on the right. He's in his chariot, which is turned and is fleeing in the opposite direction, away from Alexander. Alexander is intent upon pursuing Darius. Darius makes a kind of feeble gesture back towards Alexander. There are over 1 million tiny pieces of tile and stone that make up this mosaic. You can see some of the pieces here in this detail of Alexander. Here are 3 different forms of art: a painting, a sculpture, and architecture. The painting is Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Mist. The sculpture comes from Egypt. It's Menkaure and his queen. And then the building is the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. Now, each of these forms have a different consideration for space. The painting is 2-dimensional, flat. The sculpture is 3-dimensional. And then the architecture, we'd have to say, well, it's 4th-dimensional. We move towards it and then through it. We change our position in time and space from exterior to interior. The basic language for a visual artist revolves around what are called the formal elements. And here they are: line, shape, value, color, and texture. These are combined in various ways to create an overall arrangement called a composition. A composition is how the artwork is designed. What are the visual qualities that make it look the way it does? So let's take a look at how the formal elements are organized and arranged to create a work of art. I borrowed this chart from a book on design. It illustrates how the 5 formal elements are used according to what this chart calls the principles of organization. I like to use this painting by the French artist Chardin, Soap Bubbles. It's in the National Gallery of Art. We'll use it to talk about composition. Composition is fairly complex because it deals with all the decisions and factors that affect how the artwork ends up looking. For me, balance is a key concept. What kinds of balance are there? Well, I think of basically 2, what we call symmetrical and then asymmetrical. The chart is pretty symmetrical, but most artworks seldom are.
On the left, we have the word harmony, and on the right, variety. So harmony, things that are similar, and variety, things that are different. Harmony, things that repeat, variety, things that contrast with one another. Let's go through the formal elements in relationship to this painting. Let's start with shapes. What shapes do we see? Well, I see squares and rectangles, and then circles. The head, the bubble, the little boy, and the shadows, those are all circular shapes. Is there more harmony or variety in the shapes? I would say harmony. The shapes of the circles are fairly equal. I should mention that there's one kind of hidden shape. The body of the boy in the middle there creates an equilateral triangle as he spreads out his arms and leans on the ledge. What about value? That's light and dark. Where's the strongest light? Well, I always say the boy's forehead, right? That's where our eye is drawn when we first look at the painting. And then where does it go? Well, it follows that line of the straw down to the bubble. And then I would say the boy's hands draw our attention, and we move along the ledge to the glass with soap in it. And then there's another line, or the straw, that leads us up to the leaves, which take us around, and our eye eventually drops down into the shadows and the smaller boy. We could say that the boy's head and the bubble are the focal points in this painting. And the composition has moved our eye around the central triangular stability of the boy's body. What about color? Well, there's not much variation here. The colors are fairly similar. It's pretty harmonious. And texture? Well, this is a matter of illusionistic, like the softness of the fabric, and the hair, or the glistening smoothness of the bubble. Is this composition symmetrical or asymmetrical? Well, like most art, it's asymmetrical. Space is always an end result of the combination of things. How would we describe the spatial qualities in this painting? Well, first of all, it's two-dimensional, right? It's flat. But then we have an illusion of space. We could say there is a foreground, the bubble is the closest thing, a middle ground, the boy, and then a background. We could also maybe describe a positive space and a negative space, with the empty part of the window there being negative space beyond the boy. Let's try this abstract painting by Mondrian, his composition with red, yellow, and blue. How are things balanced here? Well, it's asymmetrical. What about harmony and variety? What creates harmony? Well, we'd have to say it's all squares and rectangles, so that's pretty harmonious, and vertical and horizontal lines. Color, we might say, is creating the variety here, contrasting colors. And then the size of the shapes also creates a bit of variety. What about texture? Well, it's smooth. We don't really feel texture. If we could see the real painting, we might have a sense of its surface. Is there a focal point in this painting? Well, the large red square, our eye, as it moves around this painting from color to color, keeps coming back to that big red square. What are the spatial considerations in this painting? It's flat, two-dimensional. Is there any spatial illusion at all? Maybe we could say there's a sense of positive and negative. The colored shapes, we could say, form a positive against the white shapes that become negative. Let's take a closer look at the formal elements. We'll begin with line. This is a red chalk drawing by Michelangelo, a figure study for the Libyan Sibyl, which is in the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, line is probably the most fundamental of the elements. It's vital to drawing like this. You can see the lines moving along the outer edges and then accumulating across the surface of the body to define the muscles. Here's the Libyan Sibyl in the fresco. Line really becomes secondary here, with color and value being more dominant. Here's another study that he did for that leg. These are what we call contour lines. They're defining the surface, not just the outer edge, but also across the surface, defining the musculature. Some of these lines have a very distinctive thick and thin quality, like the line defining the lower part of the buttocks there. That line tells us a lot about the weight and mass of the muscles. Here are two Rembrandt drawings. He liked to draw with a liquid medium like ink. Here he's using a reed pen on the left and then a brush, more evident on the right. You can feel the energy and speed of his hand moving the brush and pen as he defines what he sees. Here again, brush drawings, where the lines are thick and thin and moving energetically. We refer to quickly executed lines as gestural or calligraphic. Drawing tends to give us a direct connection to the artist's personality, to the psyche of the artist. Drawing is as individual and unique as a person's handwriting. I like to say that when you sign your name on a check, you're doing a line drawing. This is my signature. I suppose a handwriting analysis would give me some insight into my personality. Let me show you three drawings by the 12th century Chinese artist Liang Kai. He worked during the Southern Song dynasty. They're brush and ink, and they relate to Chan Buddhism, which later became known as Zen Buddhism. They believed that moments of enlightenment could happen quickly in unexpected ways, like here on the left, the monk chopping bamboo, or in the middle, tearing up pieces of paper, or maybe just going out for a little stroll. The lines created by the brush are thick and thin and quickly done and minimal. They are meant to express the flashes of unexpected inspiration that can cause insight towards enlightenment. Now here's one of my favorite Chinese brush paintings, 6 Persimmons by Mu Chi, also from the Southern Song dynasty. Each one is slightly different in terms of size and shape and value. I like how the small one has stepped forward, leaving a little gap. They each have a different personality, with plenty of space for breathing or meditation. This is wonderful, intuitive asymmetry. It also relates to Chan Buddhism because the painting can function as an object of meditation, very much like the Zen dry garden that we saw last time. Here's a work by Miro, Nocturne. Now the lines that we see here are thin but energetic as they zigzag and curve around. But let's turn to shape. What are the shapes that we see? Well, triangles, crescents, an oval. The initial shape in a painting like this is the overall outer shape. Here it's a vertical rectangle, what we refer to as the format. And then the flat surface, the two-dimensional surface, is the picture plane. Now, when you place a line or a shape on that picture plane surface, we create a spatial relationship. Like here, most of that surface becomes a negative space beyond these characters. How about on the left there, that soft, curvy line, dark line, seems to exist in the background. And then the yellow area up above, could we call that a shape? Maybe we could describe it as being amorphous. Now, I can imply a shape without actually creating it. Here, these 4 dots obviously imply a square. Now, here's a work by Escher. He was good at shapes. Here we have bird shapes becoming fish, and it's also an interesting interplay of positive and negative space, which is always kind of fun to explore. Here, a back and forth man's leg, woman's leg. It's difficult to see the man's feet when you shift and look at the woman's high heels. Here, another Escher called Day and Night. To me, the most interesting part is at the center, where we get this transition between day and night. Here the shapes reflect the jumble and complexity of a modern metropolis. Léger's The City. Bits and pieces of buildings and signage and figures, all compressed in mostly vertical movements of these jagged and irregular shapes. This put me in mind of George Gershwin's American in Paris. Let's listen to the first minute of that composition. Kind of like they were made for each other. I like the way the music and the visual qualities of the painting reinforce one another. Let me show you an artwork where texture dominates over shape. This is a collage by the South African artist Willie Bester. It's called Migrant Miseries. He created these works in protest of apartheid, that segregated racist system of government. He would go out and gather discarded refuse in the townships and then incorporate that material into his work. We can see shapes here, but the dominant formal element is texture. Here's another one, Homage to Steve Biko. He was one of the black freedom fighters who died in the struggle. Again, we see squares and rectangles, but it's the rough surface of the collaged elements and the splattered paint that creates a discordant textural quality. He gives us feelings of dissonance, danger, and anger. Here again is a painting by Stuart Davis. This one is called Swing Landscape. Again, he makes a visual connection with music. the improvisational and fluid qualities of American jazz music. This is a dynamic combination of lines and shapes that create a syncopated rhythm of movement from one thing to the next, alternating between recognizable fragments of boats, buildings, and ladders, with abstract shapes interspersed. Color is obviously an important element here, and it has a strong impact on the viewer. But before we turn to color, let's look at value. If I take the color out of this painting, all we have are these shapes of different values. It obviously decreases the impact of the painting, but it demonstrates what value is. Here's a standard value chart showing the range of grays between black and white. In the painting, there is no source of light, just light and dark shapes. If you're going to do a painting of realistic objects, you need to create an illusion of light. So you need a source of light that makes things visible, like the light shining on this sphere, causing a wide range of values to give us the illusion of three dimension. This is a painting by the Italian Baroque artist Artemisia Gentileschi. It shows Judith with her maidservant and the head of Holofernes. Well, here we see the source of light in the painting, that candle, which heightens the emotional drama of this moment. Judith has killed the general Holofernes, who is threatening to attack her town. The maidservant tries to shove the head into a bag, and Judith shields her face from the light. Maybe she's heard a noise. Someone is coming. So dramatic light and dark for a dramatic moment. Here's another version of the same subject by her. Here they've both turned to look over their shoulders. They need to make their getaway. Here's some more dramatic lighting for a quiet, tender moment. This is the French artist De La Tour. It's called Newborn. Again, the range of value here created by the light of the candle allows us to see these figures, and they become three-dimensional, and the light is really quite spellbinding as we look past the hand that shields the candle from our eyes. Leonardo paid careful attention to value in his Mona Lisa. Again, it's a small painting, here a little bigger. Art historians use an Italian word for the effects of light and dark, or value, CHIAROSCURO, which means the use of light and dark to create a convincing illusion of three-dimensional form, or it also refers to the overall arrangement of light and dark in a composition. Some modern artists use light as their medium. This is in the National Gallery in D.C., the mezzanine level. That's a Dan Flavin sculptural installation. It consists of standard green fluorescent lighting fixtures. They combine to make this green wall of light. I saw this show. I remember the museum glowing green. Here's another installation by Flavin, and one more where the light creates this wonderful contrast and barrier. Here's an abstract painting. I always had my students try to describe this in terms of composition, maybe iconography. Well, composition. How's it balanced? Well, asymmetrical, right? What do we see? Shapes, squares and rectangles, colors, red, yellow, blue, and white. What about harmony and variety? Well, there seems to be more harmony here, really, with the repetition of squares and rectangles. Is there a focal point? Not really. We just keep moving around vertically and horizontally across and up and down. What kind of space do we see? Well, it's flat. Is there any spatial illusion at all? Perhaps we could say there's positive and negative space. The colors become a positive element in front of the negative of the white. What about iconography? Could this symbolize something or represent something? Students would say, well, maybe something digital or electrical, kind of a network system or a game. And then someone would always say, well, it looks like a map of streets, like a grid, a city grid. And I would say, what city? And then someone would inevitably say, New York City. So then I would give them the artist and the title. It's a painting by Mondrian, and it's called Broadway Boogie Woogie. At this point, I would say, this painting seems to imply light without really depicting light. How could we explain that? Well, think about the city, the taxi cabs, the streets, the street lights, the marquees along Broadway, the flickering lights. What's boogie woogie? Well, that's a dance. We go to a dance hall, a disco. Maybe there's a disco ball moving around and we see the lights flickering. There's a lot of musical energy in this painting. So it does, in multiple ways, suggest light. Now here's a painting by a former student of mine, which is all about light. This old car looming towards us through a foggy kind of atmospheric light. If we come back to Van Gogh's Starry Night, we could say that this is all about light. It's the main subject of the painting. It's an exaggeration of light seen in the night sky. Let's turn our attention to color. This is the space window in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It has a tiny moon rock embedded in it, brought back by the Apollo 11 astronauts from the lunar Sea of Tranquility. The spheres and lines suggest space travel with distant stars twinkling. Now, light is what gives us color, and here, sunlight shining through colored glass, and here another window in the cathedral, letting the light and color spill into the interior and illuminate across the surface of the stone. This is a place where light and color combine to create a spiritual kind of space. This effect is what Abbot Suger was seeking when he created the first Gothic church in France. He described the effect as creating a special spiritual realm somewhere between heaven and earth. Some artists are referred to as colorists. One of my favorite colorists was Bonnard, late 19th century, early 20th century French painter. Most of his paintings depict simple domestic scenes. Here we have two interiors with window. His wife was often included in these paintings. There's a cat in the foreground of each of these. Flattened shapes and bright, shimmering color. Here's a bather with tilted space and exaggerated color. Again, there's a dog in the foreground. Here's two more. Intensified color plays a dominant role in our response to these paintings. Let's take a look at some of the vocabulary and ideas related to color.
Here's an artist's color wheel. Color is perhaps the most complex of the formal elements, but let me just go over a few basic concepts. With paints, there are three primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and they mix together to create the secondary colors, green, orange, and violet. In between are the tertiary or intermediate colors. The wheel can be divided in half, with warm colors on one side and cool colors opposite. Warm colors will appear to come forward towards us, and cool colors will tend to recede spatially. Color directly across on the wheel, they're known as complementary. Placed side by side, they intensify one another. But when you mix them with paints, they turn muddy, losing their color. Any given color can be described as having three distinctive and separate qualities. Here's a color wheel surrounding a value scale in the middle. The first quality is simply the color, or what we call the hue. Which family of colors does it belong to? Is it a yellowish color, or is it blue? Simply naming the general color. The second quality is value. How light or dark is the color relative to that value scale? This demonstrates that quality. Yellow is high value. It's up fairly close to white. Red and blue are lower in their value in relationship to the value scale. And then that third quality. This has to do with the horizontal band connecting the gray scale in the center to the outer color wheel. We could use a few different words to describe this quality. Chroma, intensity, or saturation. These all mean just about the same thing. How pure is any given color in terms of its hue? Now, this is a slice out of the Munsell system of color. It was a systematic way of standardizing color for mixing. And this is what it sort of would look like if we could make it into a three-dimensional volume based on the color wheel. We tend to think of Van Gogh as a colorist, but not early on in a self-portrait like this. He certainly has that intensity, but this is all about value, light and dark. Here he's interested in chiaroscuro. Now later on, he shows his keen interest in color. This is just after that incident with his ear. But he's using color here for its emotional and symbolic impact. Complements, red and green, blue and orange. They intensify one another and create these strong contrasts. Let me demonstrate the power of color. Here's a turtle. There's a black dot in the center. Concentrate on that dot. Don't look away. We're letting the red embed itself in your eye and brain. Now, shift your focus to the black dot over on the right. What do you see? Well, yes, a greenish turtle that will begin probably to jump around and then blur out. That's an after image. Your brain will automatically rush in to replace that red with its complementary opposite, green. Let's try another one. This is our flag, but obviously the colors are wrong. Concentrate on the white dot in the center. Your retina is being saturated with these colors. And when we take them away, we see the red, white, and blue in all its glory. It might even be waving around in the wind. This potential for after images is why the color of things in an operating room are cool, greenish in color. So when the doctor looks up and around, he won't see after images of blood red. There are other situations where color can change, like this, where the color of the X is the same on both sides, and yet we see it as two different colors. This is called simultaneous contrast, the fact that colors have the power to affect one another. Black and white can have a powerful effect on colors. Let me show you a few examples, like gray. Here's a neutral gray, and when we see it on black and white, obviously it's much darker on the white and lighter on the black. What about yellow? Well, yellow deepens on white and then seems to be lit in a more dramatically lightened way on black. Red, again, on the black, the red shines with an intense luminosity and then goes kind of dark over on the white. Blue, same effects. Black causes the blue to glow with light, and the white deepens it, makes it more somber and moody. Here's a contrast of warm and cool. Orange and blue are complements. And here's a neutral gray. Let's see if we can force that gray to change its color just a bit. If we put the gray on the orange, it begins to move towards blue. It looks bluer. If we take that same neutral gray and put it over on the blue, it will shift its hue towards the complement of the color that surrounds it. So that gray is now becoming, we could say, more orangish. The longer you look, the stronger the effect. Look at the gap between the two colors in the center. Again, this effect is called simultaneous contrast, and it gets stronger the longer you look. So, from light, we get color. Here we see it being separated from white light into the color spectrum by a prism. Now, the visible light that we see is only a small part of the energy waves in the electromagnetic field, with ultraviolet and infrared on either side. So the colors are created by the light rays bending through the prism coming from the sun. Now, blue waves are shorter and red waves are longer. Here again, the spectrum of colors and a prism. Now, there are two distinctive ways of mixing color. If you use light, you end up with three primaries of red, blue, and green. So when you project those colors together, they create white in the center. This is called additive mixing. Red, blue, and green produce the secondaries of yellow, magenta, and cyan, with white then in the center. Now, for artists who are using paint, again, the primaries are red, yellow, blue, and mixing those colors together are called subtractive mixes. The secondaries are orange, green, and violet, and in the center, you end up with black. As an artist used to mixing paint, I'm always amazed by the idea that red and green make yellow. Not with paint. you usually end up with a color that is brownish or muddy. In color photo reproduction, yellow, magenta, and cyan, the secondaries of additive mixing, combine with black to create the full range of color. Tiny dots of these colors are remixed in our eyes and our brains in order to produce the sensation of different colors. Here again, the photo. This is the famous painting by George Seurat, his Sunday afternoon on the island of Grande Jatte. Like Cézanne and Van Gogh, Seurat is classified as a post-impressionist. Here's Cézanne's Mont Sainte-Victoire. Now he was interested in color for its spatial interaction, warm and cool. Warm colors come forward and cool colors recede. So he creates a kind of spatial ambiguity on the surface of his canvas. Here's Van Gogh's Night Café. He was interested in the emotional and symbolic power of color. He said about this painting that he was trying to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. Now Seurat, instead, is interested in the optical power of color. He is sometimes called a neo-impressionist because of the color combinations creating intensified color. Seurat's method was to use tiny dots and dabs of multiple colors in each area, like the little girl near the center of the painting who has picked some flowers and is admiring them. He called his method divisionism, but we generally describe it as pointillism. Look at the colors in her flesh and in the darker patch of green grass. He wanted his colors to appear luminous, as if they were filled with light. Here's a closer look at the standing couple. Instead of creating colors by subtractive mixing, he was trying to make the mixtures appear additive. He worked on this painting for 2 years. It's a big painting. It's almost 10 feet across. I had a student once who said, "Oh, I've seen that painting." I said, "Really? You've been to the Chicago Art Institute?" He said, "No, it was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off." Well, part of that movie, those kids stand in front of this paintings. Now, in some ways, his technique is similar to the small dots and dabs of color used in color photo reproduction. When we get in close here, you can see how luminous these colors appear. And just as a reminder, here's the detail of the eye from that photograph. Here again is Picasso's Girl Before a Mirror. How would we describe the colors in this painting? Well, he uses primaries and secondaries. Some of the color is very high chroma. Some is lower in its intensity. What about the formal elements? Line, yes. Shape, circles, ovals, diamonds. Value plays a role. There's even a little texture in the surface of the paint. What about composition? How's it balanced? Well, we would say asymmetrical. Is there more harmony or variety? Well, he creates harmony by the repetition of the circles and variety by his use of color. Look at her face. She has both a frontal and profile view as she looks toward the mirror, but also out towards us. Her reflection is really more emotional than physical. I like to say there is one extremely potent color in this painting. For me, it's that dark green oval on her forehead in the reflected image. It seems to symbolize her emotions. We could say her psyche. Maybe some other color would have worked okay, but that green seems powerful. And then he contrasted it with a little red next to it. Let me turn to one of my favorite contemporary artists, Jim Turrell. Light is his medium. This is one of his early works. You enter a dark room, and slowly your eyes adjust, and you see a colored rectangular shape on the far wall. As you approach, the rectangle becomes more and more tangible, but you can't really tell exactly what it's made out of. The closer you get, the more of a solid surface you see. But when you get right up to it and you reach out to touch it, your hand goes right through it. There is nothing there. It's a hole in the wall. That solid color was an optical illusion caused by an effect known as celestial vaulting. The space beyond the sharply defined hole, the rectangular shape, that space was full of light, which appears to form a solid membrane across the surface of the rectangular opening. This is another Turrell. It's in the Houston Museum of Art. It's a passageway between the old museum and a new building. And as you can see, the edges of the walkway are filled with light that changes its color periodically, and the light and the color form a wall along the sides of this passageway. Let me show you a short little video about this work, which is entitled "The Light Inside."
Generally, we use light. We don't really pay much attention to the light itself. That's my interest, this fascination with light and how we come to light.
When you really start to look, then you sort of lose yourself.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes sort of disorienting. Whoa.
Let me show you one more by Turrell. It was an installation in the Guggenheim, Frank Lloyd Wright's dynamic little museum in New York City. Remember Kai and his "I Want to Believe" installation with the cars hanging from the skylight? This is a view up in that same space with Turrell's installation. Here again, two various views looking up towards the skylight. He called it Aten Rain, making reference to the sun god of Akhenaten, that ancient Egyptian pharaoh. The sunlight from the skylight mixes with colored lights hidden from view. So the color and the sense of light was always changing as people viewed it. Here's one more view. People looking up towards this wonderful, rich blue. Let me end this lecture
with two artworks that I used to quiz students about. This is Jasper John's Target with Four Faces. It's a combination of painting and sculpture. There's a target. What does that mean? Well, a target is something that you aim at. You shoot at a target. What about the faces? Well, they're locked in these little boxes. We don't see their eyes. There's even a little lid that could be lowered and cover the faces so we wouldn't have to see them if we didn't want to. And the target is painted with encaustic, which is hot wax, and there's newspaper clippings embedded in and underneath the wax. So what does this mean? Well, I always ended up thinking it was about prisoners on death row waiting for their execution. When someone is executed, historically they would cover their eyes, and that's sort of what we see here. And if we don't want to think about it, we can simply lower that little lid and cover up their faces. And here, this is a work by another former student of mine, Mark Berman. He was at the University of Idaho. This is a print entitled Letter to Marnie. So what's being communicated here? I always said, who's Marnie? Well, Marnie would be the photograph there, this black and white photograph of the profile of a girl. It's difficult to kind of figure out exactly what's going on here. On the lower right is a map. And obviously we see some letters with stamps, so some communication has been transpiring here. On the left, always what looked like the end of an old film strip to me, and some kind of measuring device. Maybe the most interesting things are those marks up above Marnie's head there. I always ask students, what do they appear to be? And usually I could get the word scribble, but they really seem to be marks of frustration. Now, I knew both of these people, Mark and Marnie. Marnie had already graduated from school and was back on the East Coast, and so they were trying to maintain their relationship long distance by writing letters, and it was frustrating for Mark. And so those are the things that he was thinking about when he made this work of art. Now, next time, I'm going to begin talking about two-dimensional art and how we go about making pictures.